Early in-person voting kicked off today in Georgia. The state's critical pair of runoff elections will determine which party controls the chamber. In some counties, the early voting period runs until December 31st. Republican incumbents David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are defending their seats from Democratic challengers Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. Democrats must win both seats in order to flip the Senate in their favor. Republicans need to win only one. It's also a big day for presidential politics in the state. Following 2 recounts, Georgia's 16 electors met at the state capitol this afternoon to formally cast their ballots for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. For more, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tia Mitchell. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. Tia is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Washington correspondent. It's good to see you both. So, Caitlin, the political stakes in Georgia are incredibly high. What are you seeing on the ground there that reflects that?
Well, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, say all eyes should be on Georgia because these are the races that will determine the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. So Republicans are saying that, look, this is the last line of defense against the incoming Biden administration, even as the president himself continues to undermine the results of the election, which was certified by those 16 electors here in Georgia today. Democrats are saying that, look, if Biden wants to get anything done, if he wants to get his agenda through, he's going to need allies in Congress. Remember, in the 2020 elections, Republicans gained seats in the House, so the Democratic majority there is much slimmer than it was before the election. And Republicans held on to lots of Senate seats. So they are saying that this is kind of the way to help Biden achieve anything in his agenda. Talking to voters today here at the State Farm Arena, which has been transformed into a voting location. You can see the polling locations right behind me, or the ballot boxes right behind me. Voters today were really, recognizing that they are in the spotlight, that kind of all eyes are watching what happens here in Georgia. This is a place that's used to runoff elections, but this is going to be one that really determines who controls the Senate next year.
Well, Tia, I want to play a clip of a new campaign video from Democrat Reverend Raphael Warnock. Let's listen to that.
There's a lot of stuff to do this time of year. Get the tree.
Done.
Hang the lights. Not yet, but this year there's one extra thing to do. Vote. That's right. Early voting starts December 14th. So make voting part of your holiday plans. It'll probably take you less time than it'll take me to do this. I'm Raphael Warnock, and I approve this message.
So, Tia, why is there such an emphasis on early voting, and what are the campaigns doing to get people to turn out now before the holidays?
Well, there's a big emphasis on early voting, number one, because we don't know what the pandemic's going to do, and perhaps if there's a spike or shutdowns and things like that, that could mean that by the time the voting day comes around, that people aren't comfortable heading to the polls in person. And also, what both parties have shown us, Democrats more recently, but for decades it was Republicans who showed us that if you get people to vote early, that bodes well for your overall turnout, because voting encourages other people to vote, and it just gets it out of the way in a way that really can boost a party's success at the polls. And so really what Democrats are doing is just replicating an old Republican playbook that's kind of fallen out of favor now, of course, in the age of Donald Trump. And so all of the candidates are pushing an early voting message. It's just that on the Republican side, it is a little muddy because President Trump and his allies have been so critical, in particular, of mail-in voting.
Yeah. Well, Caitlin, the candidates on both sides appear to be running joint campaigns. And while it may make sense to pool resources, are there any potential downsides in forming these alliances?
It really is a unique situation here where you have 2 runoff races for 2 Senate seats. So you have seen the Democratic candidates kind of unite and the Republican candidates unite, because this has become a nationalized race, as I mentioned before, given that power of the Senate is at stake. There could be some liabilities with that. What's interesting, though, is that there are some nuances in these races as well. So when you look at the November election, for example, David Perdue actually ran about 800 votes ahead of Donald Trump, which suggests that there are voters who backed Perdue and also Joe Biden, who won the state by more than 11,000 votes. So those are kind of voters that the Republicans are hoping kind of appeal to or they can appeal to them on that let's be a check on power dynamic here against Democrats in Congress. What's interesting also is that Republicans are running more against Warnock, trying to make him a nationalized figure because they believe that he's a more controversial one. And you see in the messaging lots and lots of attacks on him, and also attacks that speak to the base of the Republican Party and trying to animate white voters as well. And so that's an interesting dynamic. Jon Ossoff, of course, was known at the beginning of President Trump's administration because he was the first Democrat to run in that special House election, was unsuccessful in that, but garnered a lot of kind of national fame and raised a lot of money. And so Democrats are kind of hoping that he can play that figure again this time around. But Republicans seem to be kind of pushing forward that message.
Well, Tia, in a tweet Sunday night, President Trump continued his attacks on fellow Republicans, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and Governor Brian Kemp. He said that former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams had played them both for fools and accused Democrats of weakening election safeguards in Georgia. He also repeated his demand for a special session. Are there any signs that Georgians are buying into the argument that Governor Kemp is somehow responsible for the president's loss?
Actually, there is evidence of that. You know, when you talk to conservative voters, when you talk to those voters in Georgia who are diehard supporters of President Trump, they do blame Governor Kemp and Secretary of State Raffensperger for not investigating what they say are election improprieties, even though there isn't evidence of that. And so that is resonating with voters. And that also is affecting, again, this Senate race, because we have mixed messages on the GOP side that could depress turnout. Of course, Governor Kemp says he's done all he can to protect the integrity of the election, that he is a Trump supporter. He's even recently said that he wants to make sure that any fraud or impropriety is rooted out. But he also has said, you know, I've done my best to protect elections. I think, you know, Newt Gingrich said it most clearly recently when he said some of these changes that Democrats pushed for and Republican leaders ultimately agreed have made it easier to vote and therefore harder for Republicans to win statewide. And that's the quiet part said out loud that I think frustrates many Republicans. But again, it's not about fraud or abuse. It's simply that more people have been allowed to vote.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what effect all of these messages have on Republican turnout in particular. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tia Mitchell, great to have you both. Thank you.
Thank you.